Let's begin now with part 3 here and looking at technology. Now, for some reason, I don't understand. I love technology, but notice that I've changed it because I've included engineering, because a lot of what we're talking about in this section with the Civil War is engineering. And then I am fascinated with the subject of organization, and that comes up as a constant here as well. So we'll be looking at that as well. So let's take a look at the Union. And here you see, this is a map of 1850 of the railroads, and you can see the railroads in the Northeast. You can see the few railroads in the South. But now, when we jump to an 1860 map, you see the incredible growth of railroads in the North. You see the concentration around Chicago, the spiraling out from Chicago, and you have the movement along the river lines, and you have the movement along the Great Lakes, and a tremendous penetration into New England, and again, a fraction of that activity in the South. So, at the most basic level of technology, a tremendous difference between the North and the South and what goes on here. And now, as is so often the case, there are going to be individuals that are absolutely essential in the doing of this. And one of these guys is a guy named Herman Haupt, uh, who realizes how incredibly woeful uh, uh, the railroad system is of that time. It's not organized at all. It's all separate organizations, all separate companies, and no unification. And then he's going to move to unify and bring all of the railroads together into the United States military railroad system. And both Grant and Sherman are well aware of the fact that the railroad's absolutely essential to what goes forth. In the Vicksburg battle we talked about before, there were railroads brought them to the river, and Admiral Farragut brought them to Grant. And here's a good example of what happens. Uh, Here you see a major river bridge across the Potomac, an essential bridge for movement, and the Union, the Confederate forces had attacked it and destroyed it and burnt it down. And Hop arrives, and he says, "Okay, we're going to rebuild this bridge." And notice what they're showing here. Number one, there's a lot of blacks working here, either former slaves or freedmen that were picked up by the uh, Union forces, but a large number of blacks working on the project. He isn't even taking time to cut the bark off the trees. He's just hauling the timber up as it stands. And what would normally have taken many weeks to rebuild, Hop does this in a matter of days. I forget exactly how many days, but it's an incredible feat of engineering and innovation and thinking outside the box. Uh, and this is Lincoln looks at this bridge and says, "My God, it's built of corn stalks and bean stalks, bean poles, because it appears so rickety, but it works." So the Hop is a major element of the success of the Union because of what he does. The early ways are not successful. The early field generals took trains, robbed the cars, and had the railroad cars, stay with them as portable uh, warehouses, and refused to take into account other needs that were there. I love the tale that I heard, and I used it in one of my earlier classes years ago of Teddy Roosevelt, with the Rough Riders getting to Tampa. I think they were leaving for Cuba from Tampa, and he gets to the pier, and there's no train available, so he robs a train and backs it up down the pier with his men, and gets them to the dock. And then he basically robs a ship and takes the ship out and sails towards Cuba. Now, I don't know how much of that is true, but the chaos of logistics is what it typifies, and that's what was happening in the Union until Haupt arrives and brings some structure and organization to it. And he he recognizes that there must be some systems. Now, remember the importance of hearing the word systems again and again and again, because systems connotes an organization across wide parameters, and a systems approach and a systems view. When we talked earlier about Napoleon seeing a gestalt of the battle scene at Toulon, that is a kind of a systems approach, and here um, he brings a new level of professionalism to the rail line. By the way, the entire concept of professionalism is just beginning to sweep across the whole enormous growth of professional organizations like the American Medical Association, etc., are coming to fore during this time period. So the organization of the depots, the organization of who's going to be unloaded, when and where and how, uh, this is tremendously important to the success. And then the other organizational innovation he makes is repair lines. The Confederates are notorious at sending in guerrillas or cavalry units and destroying the rail nets. They know how dependent the Union is on them. And what Haupt does is he puts together emergency crews, and they have all the equipment they need on the train. They hear that a line has been damaged. They run the repair line, the repair train to it. The crew's already, and in a very, very quick period of time, they repair the damage, and the Union forces go forward. The other innovation he has is he brings supplies forward, and he has forward dumps, so that they don't have to rely upon people coming from the back forward. He has them pre-positioned forward, knowing where they're going to be needed. And this, I love this. Intermodal is an incredibly important thing today. Intermodal, where a container ship comes in from China at a port in LA, and they pick up the 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 carriage, the the wagon, if you will, pick it up off the ship, the container, and drop it right into a car, a truck, or right onto a railhead, and that's intermodal. They move it around endlessly, and here you see a early interaction of this, where he loads the box cars and loads the materials right from the ships, the barges, to supplies. So incredible degree of organization and foresight. And obviously, what he does here becomes very, very important in the development of rail lines that burgeon. And what we see going forward from this time is the endless consolidation of rail lines. So rail lines getting larger and larger and larger, until the transcontinental comes along, and all of the rail nets that come out of Chicago, etc. So Hop is a very, very important figure in the development of technology and the use of technology in America. The other discovery, of course, is the telegraph. And the telegraph is an extraordinary tool for the military. For the first time, they're able to communicate with one another. And they have signal systems that they set up. They have torches, they have systems of organizations where they send the telegraph units, they synchronize it, they set up the cryptographic systems so they're coded. So uh, the telegraph gives them a whole separate system of what to do, and the telegraph works in total conjunction with the railroads, the telegraph lines alongside the railroad lines. Um, Lincoln is actually, and I'm sure here's the image of Lincoln in the telegraph office. Lincoln apparently has a heavy interest in technology. He actually has his own patents uh, from a youth, from his days on the Mississippi. But he spends an enormous amount of time in the telegraph room getting direct messages from the fronts, knowing what's going on. It may have been his relief also from the travails of his wife, and one of the incredible banes for office holders in this time period. In fact, uh, some assassinations came from it. Is office seekers where they just hound the president mercilessly, trying to get a job, and so it's a very difficult job. The other place where there's tremendous technologic movement is in the naval front. The monitor murmuring is a common noise everyone knows. So that the ironclad, the revolving turret, tremendous changes in what goes on. And then the pilot house, the smokestack, the steam driven, the fact that it has a shallow draft, that it slopes that, and of course it has a much reduced profile, so they're used to firing broadsides at very large targets, and it just isn't something like that that they can go for. Then, of course, the other part of it, oops, I shouldn't be there. I'm sorry. Anyway, we're missing the slide, so I can get us to it. There's another one here. Steam power is tremendously important, and not only is it steam power that's important, but the very fact of screw propellers, and instead of the side paddles or rear paddles. So the innovations in the Navy are profound. And then another man who is an incredible, powerful um, false force multiplier is Meigs, who is the Quartermaster General, and he brings all kinds of innovations. So again, setting up supply depots in a timely fashion. One of the really interesting things he does is he manages the budget. He keeps accounts, and Cameron, who had this position ahead of him, no, he wasn't quartermaster. He was secretary of the army. It was rampant corruption in some of these offices prior to Meigs, and he stopped that. But one of the things you have to realize how important it is he standardizes equipment. He standardizes sizes. He standardize shoe sizes, shirt sizes, uniform sizes. And you realize, again, you have to realize what an economic multiplier that is, because what it means is you now can nationalize a market where before, if it's a custom-made shoe, you can't very well, you know, sell across the entire nation or region, and it starts in the regions before it goes nationally. But if you have sizes where someone can go in and relatively quickly pick out the size they need, that's an incredible multiplier in what goes on. And so the standardization of equipment is a major innovation, and this comes from Meigs. And then, as I said before, the integration of the rail lines, and then the accountability in the quality control of some of the early uniforms was absolutely horrendous, and just incredible corruptions. And he brings all that to a halt. And then a system of supplying where he pushes the supplies forward. Um, Now, let's jump to the Bolsheviks and what we see happening with the Bolsheviks. Uh, Again, it's a different kind of setup altogether. As I said, uh, the war in the Soviet in Russia is fundamentally a railroad war, and what Trotsky does is Trotsky sets up an armored train And he basically, with the armored train, first of all, it's armored. Um, there are uh, machine guns on it, men on it, uh, artillery, not positioned like this, cavalry, not positioned like this, but it means that there were uh, again, realize all these Gemini produced pictures in some cases are silly in the mistakes they make. But there would be cavalry troops on the train, and there would be horses in another car, and when they reached a place, the men could go jump on their horses and literally jump from the cars and go and engage in combat. But it was the ability of Trotsky to bring substantial manpower and firepower to wherever the need was greatest and to turn that tide. And Trotsky, depicted here on his kind of constant leather jacket, that leather jacket was so incredibly common with the NKVD, the checker, in something I saw in the 1990s. Uh, uh, he was a very charismatic speaker. He was a very fluid and commanding orator. And so he would arrive, and the propaganda he would bring would be powerful in just that shot in the arm that what he brought. And so this was incredibly powerful. And it's again the utilization of the technology that is there and what they can do. And this is actually a map of the current day railroad, but you can see the same. It's the same. Or you've got the Trans-Siberian coming across. You have Moscow as the hub, sending out to the republics. You've got Petrograd, St. Petersburg as the hub, sending out, and then traveling out to the Caucasus. Here's Volgograd. Here's the Volga here, and Kiev is over here. So this is where virtually all of the population is. So the rails are very, very important. And here's another depiction of an armored train in operation where this is not Trotsky's train, but you can see how the train could be pulling up and bringing in reinforcements and bringing in um, firepower of a different kind, and the influence that that had. Now, again, this is a kind of a silly portrayal from Gemini, but Nano Banana. But basically, what they do is they have a peasant's cart, and they have a machine gun mounted on that cart, not firing at the back of the driver, but firing back behind it. But again, it was a mobile unit, and it was able to bring fast relief fast in. Now, the other use of technology is a powerful use of agitprop, of propaganda. The Bolsheviks have to win control of the country, and one of the ways they do that is with an incredible pushing of information from the Bolsheviks, from Moscow, St. Peter, Petrograd. And so what you have here is you come into the village, and what do you see here? You see a huge number of posters. Now, as we've said already, the peasants are fundamentally illiterate. So what you have is you have illustrations. They don't have to know what the words mean. They can see what the pictures say, and that's important. And then the radio is developed. And so what they're able to do then is to broadcast over the radio, so the peasants don't have to be able to understand or read, but they can hear and they understand the spoken voice. So they have mechanisms to get to the people. And here's an example of setting up a telegraph station. And the same thing would go where the nodes would be developed. So railroad stations would be again places where the radio stations would be blaring on a rather constant basis. And the propaganda posters would be there to marshal, to mobilize, to educate, to win the support of the uh, peasants. And there were trains, not armored trains, but agit propaganda trains, where the purpose of the train was to sell the ideas of Bolshevism, to sell the ideas of communism, and to win the support of the common people. And so here you see one of those trains bedecked with the posters, and then the speaker from the party, no doubt, coming and giving his talk to the people. So utilizing that, and Russia actually has a very large river system, uh, and it will develop a very, very large canal system under Stalin that also connects things. And we actually traveled some of those canals from the Volga to the Don, which was an extraordinary adventure. But here they use this to bring people down to the riverbanks where they know them, and again, an object of propaganda. Uh, I'm told that some of these signs are absolute gibberish, but since I don't know Russian or Cyrillic, I don't know which one's gibberish, but some of them are. And so, again, the Bolsheviks use this as a system that's incredibly important. All right, it's fascinating to look at Lenin, and he apparently has a fixation on Western capitalism and Ford and what they term Fordism and the efficiency of American industry. And he wants socialism as he envisions it to replicate the efficiency, uh, and more importantly, as we've stressed again and again in these sessions, the organization of efficiency that modern industry has brought to power in the United States. It's comical to think that what ends up being the Soviet industrial style is so totally antithetical to what is happening with mass production in the United States. So Lenin sees American efficiency and marvels at it, and he wants to pick up the capitalist prototype, but he wants to use it within the Soviet system. And he sees the American efficiency as such a powerful tool, and he sees that the magic of it is in the organization, not in the hard technology. Uh, and here is the logic of the continuous flow. This is actually a bad photograph to illustrate it, but one of Ford's major assistants observes the meatpacking factory, probably in Chicago, and realizes that the efficiency of the disassemble line, where they bring down the carcass, and then each man has a different part of pulling out, whether one does the ribs or the ham hock or whatever, but each has a specific function, and then it passes down. He basically realizes that if we can disassemble this way, maybe we could organize the line so that the assembly is done in the same way. And of course, everything changed forever from there. And the term that they use for this, I love it, is Fordism, the continuous flow of the assembly line. And he sees this uh, in the stockyards, and he sees it in what happens with Ford's Highland Mills plant, and God forbid what will come later. And the other thing that I find Lenin fascinated with that absolutely mystifies me, I would never have anticipated this. He's encapsulated by Taylorism. Taylorism is when an accountant, if you will, sits and watches a worker work, and they have a clipboard and a stopwatch, and they time every action and try to find the most efficient and effective way for that worker to do that process, and then tailor and increase the efficiency of that worker doing that project, and then setting up the standards by which that work should be assessed. And I can't imagine anything more foreign to what ends up being the real rule of Soviet industry than expecting Taylorism to flourish there. But what he does do is Lenin does build national systems. So he knows he's going to build a new energy network, a new electrification network, and he equates electrification with the delivery of socialism and the delivery of the Soviet system to the people. So uh, he comes up with this saying that apparently used repeatedly: communism is power, Soviet power plus the electrification of the whole country. So when electrification is done, communism will then be able to power it forward. Uh, and uh, this was his answer to what was going to happen. And so what he wants to do is he wants to take the railroads, the corporation model, the capitalist model in the States, and apply it to the Soviet system, to the socialist, and rather than the private power plants, integrate a national, rather than separate corporations, a national one system instead of corporate management, state mandated industrial planning, as this will evolve into Stalin's 5-year plans, I assume. And again, it's the reality of what actually happens is so far away from this. And this is his blueprint. This is what he wants to accomplish. With his NEP, he does some of this, but um, you know, the it just doesn't happen. And I always forget which tale I tell at which place. So if I'm repeating myself, I apologize. But as I'm sure I've mentioned, I've done work in Volgograd, the former Stalingrad, a number of times, and they have a huge tractor factory in Volgograd. It literally was the plant that built T-34 tanks during World War II, and it was notorious that it would literally produce tanks that would begin firing on the Germans as it exited the plant. And it was one of the major sites of the battle between the German forces and Soviet forces, and it's been captured in a number of films. And I tried to get permission to go visit it. And after several years of trying, we finally got permission. And this factory had about 35,000 workers in it. At the same time that uh, the Ford Mahwah plant was at work in Mahwah, New Jersey. And the Ford Mahwah plant was a relatively small Ford facility, and they probably had maybe 2,000 workers. And I forget what the output of that factory was, but it was greater than the factory in Volgograd that had 35,000 workers. And the scene that I will absolutely never forget is when we got to the final assembly scene where they're making farm tractors, and there's a crew of men there with sledgehammers, and they're slamming on the door to the tractor of the to get into the cabin of the tractor because the door won't shut, and the only way they can get the door to shut is by slamming it with sledgehammers. And then the scene was unbelievable. Scattered around the grounds were engines sitting out in the air, obviously totally rusted. Uh, so to think that they were going to get the efficiency. And then the workers on that line, the workers were all North Vietnamese soldiers in their uniforms of North Vietnamese, and they'd been brought in to do the final assembly line. And it was a scene of chaos like I could not imagine in any American factory. So interestingly, Lenin's models are what he perceives and observes in Germany. So he's absolutely marvels at the efficiency of the German post office, and he marvels at the wonder of the German railroads, and he thinks he's going to bring something like that to the Soviet Union, what will soon become the Soviet Union, and it is so far from the reality of what happens. It's sadly comical. All right, we're going to jump to our next piece here, which is leadership. We're going to break this into two parts. One looking at Trotsky and Grant, and then the second part on the most interesting one of Lincoln and Lenin. But let's look at the leadership of Grant and Trotsky. Very, very different in the way you go after it, but an interesting, again, comparison to look at. Both of these men are the men that led the way to victory, led the way to victory in leading the armies that were decisive in it. And Grant comes in and he has a structured army. It is split, obviously, as all the Southerners, all the Confederates withdraw and go, as did Lee, as did so many other officers. Again, all graduates of West Point. But with Trotsky and the Soviet Red Army, obviously all the prior military leaders are czarist officers, and they don't trust them. So Trotsky's task is to build an army de novo, to try to build the army totally. And the ideology of theirs is that any worker is able to develop and come forth as a leader. And in Grant's background, he West Point graduate, very, very good experience in the Mexican American War, where he learned an awful lot. But when he leaves after the war, his career is lackluster at the best. And Trotsky is an intellectual. He's a member of the intelligentsia, and an agitator, an incredible orator, but a revolutionary and a revolutionary organizer. Absolutely no military experience, none whatsoever. And he's the guy that's going to build the Red Army. So the scope of the two of them is vastly, vastly different. Um, Grant, in his military command, no problem whatsoever in understanding that the military is under civilian control and that the president is the commander in chief. With Trotsky, it's different in that he has his military responsibilities. He assumes all kinds of political responsibilities, and he's an ideologue. So he brings elements to this that are just absent. Grant has none of the political, none of the ideological. So in that regard, they're coming from different sets altogether. And in Grant's case, he has the industrial supply line. He has the professionalization of the ranks that have been in place, and will improve substantially after this war. And he has his loyalty to the Constitution and the Union. And in Trotsky's case, it's totally, totally different. We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but as we've already said, uh, when the Soviets, when the leaders from the masses fail in trying to lead the military, Trotsky and Lenin both realize that they have to go and bring in the former Tsarist officers. So to politically control those officers, they bring up the political commissar pattern, and that enforces the political rectitude. And again, I've said before, so at every command level, there is a commissar, a Bolshevik commissar. So every company, every regiment, every battalion, every division has a the political commissar. He was overlooking every single command decision made. Now, interestingly enough, there's parallels in here. Uh, Grant, in contrast again to McClellan, is able and willing to take incredible casualty rates because of the strategic uh, gains made by them, and he's savagely criticized for taking those casualties much heavier than anyone prior to him. And in Trotsky's case, they have to go back to some of the incredibly harsh discipline of the Tsarist day to control the Red Army. And that means public executions of those who are deemed to have deserted by leaving their post or refusing orders or showing cowardliness. So there's a systematic process of coercion that they need to force the the peasant army, if you will. They're all the people coming in are going to be peasants. So again, the extraordinary contrast that we see as we look between the two and the character of how they are defined. And again, that difference lays out the difference between the United States and what will become the Soviet Union. So while there is at one level this convergence of the willingness to take the casualties and fight to the victory that is needed, the way in which they do it, the mechanism of how they do it, is profoundly different, and we see that at every level we look at with this war. So they took civil chaos and they organized military systems. Again, look at that word systems, the organization that enabled them to make the winning. And in Trotsky's case, he's the architect of the Red Army and carries forth. Now, of course, as I forget, I always forget what the hell I've already said, but of course, Trotsky is so successful that he is the major threat to Stalin after Lenin's death. And of course, Stalin campaigns mightily to get him removed, and eventually gets him to be expelled from the Soviet Union, and then eventually, years later, manages his assassination in Mexico. So a tremendous difference. And then here are the three differences really that are so clear. So we have the Red Army, and we've certainly talked about that, and Trotsky there leading it. And we have the party, the cadre of the party as the dictator of the proletariat, and we've certainly talked to that. But here's the element we haven't really talked to yet. Under Lenin, the Cheka is established, and Dzerzhinsky is the guy who is put in charge of it. And I don't think, I'm not sure we have terms in language familiar to us as to capture exactly what it is. It's not adequate to talk to it about a secret police, because what it is it's an agent. It's a governmental agent of terror. It's an agent of the party and the party is the one totally in control. And their role is to maintain control over everything. And so anyone is arrested by them, anyone is executed by them, and uh, everyone confesses to whatever they're asked to confess against. And as we've said before, Tukhachevsky is arrested by them and is tortured by there. I don't think I've mentioned that Rukhovsky, who is the Soviet marshal that leads the Battle of Bagration and is so effective in leading that, he was arrested by the Cheka in the military purge. He is tortured by the Cheka. It was probably the NKVD then, not the Cheka, and loses teeth, is permanently damaged, and comes back and fights very effectively for the system, which is astonishing to me. All right, we're going to break there as our next break. And our next session, we're going to look at this fascinating comparison of Lincoln and Lenin in a way in which I had never anticipated doing prior to this.